is not Five Nights at Freddy's. This is also not Five Nights at Freddy's. And this is... Okay, no, that one actually is Five Nights at Freddy's. But this one isn't. I think. For the last 4 months, I have remade the original Five Nights at Freddy's entirely from scratch in my own custom game engine. It's completely playable from start to finish, including 6th night and custom nights, and it looks, sounds, and plays almost identically to the original, so you cannot tell the difference. And this is only the beginning, as I'm planning to improve it to make it even better than the original. So you probably have a ton of questions right now. Why would you make that? Is it legal? No, seriously, why would you make that? Can I play it? You're not answering my question. Why? I'm gonna be honest, I came up with this idea 3 years ago and I cannot remember what made me come up with it. Like a lot of game developers, I have a list of random project ideas that I will probably never get around to. And about 2 years ago, I wrote down, re-implement the original FNAF games to make them better to play, also in case they implode. So I'm doing that now. Thanks, younger me! By re-implement, what I mean there is that I'm remaking FNAF 1 from scratch, but instead of other attempts to remake the game, my goal is to write all my code to be as functionally identical to the original as much as possible, minus a few small decisions I'll make along the way. My goal with this project isn't to improve FNAF with extra stuff like 3D, more features, or ugly designs, or lag.
Already dead.
Okay, I'm done teasing. The ultimate goal is to make the exact same game without using the game engine the original FNAF 1 uses, Click Team Fusion. I'll get to what I used later, but think of this less like a remake and more like an enhanced version of the game. Looks the same, sounds the same, plays the same, but with some new additions to help the experience feel up to date. Okay, but that still didn't answer the question though, did it? If I had to take a guess as to what inspired me to write this idea down, it would probably be when streamer and fellow FNAF appreciator Astral Spiff tried to play a game of Twitch Plays FNAF, where his Twitch chat took control of the game and had to survive. The stream was really fun, I'll have the edited video linked below, but in the stream Spiff mentions the difficulty of getting FNAF 1 to cooperate. The way Spiff set it up did work, but by his admission, it was really jank too. Great stream, amazing video, but it got me thinking. This stream would have been so much easier to set up if the original FNAF 1 on PC didn't force itself to be full screen without using third-party apps. Spiff would also have had an easier time if the game allowed for controller support like the console ports, then the chat would just trigger controller presses. Actually, speaking of the console ports, the mobile and console versions of the games add new features. I wonder if Scott will ever update the games on PC to add them. Nope, I don't think he will. After doing a little bit of googling, as well as just playing the original 2D FNAF games, turns out the overall experience of playing them is,
It's not great.
Here are just a few issues I found. If you've played 2D FNAF a lot, you might know of others, but these are the main ones that made me realize just how screwed the original games on PC are. Like I said before, the 2D FNAF games use a game engine called Click Team Fusion. This thing has been around in some form or another for literally decades, since the 90s I think, and is a very intuitive way to make 2D games for a lot of platforms, mainly side-scrollers. Especially side-scrollers. Scott's been using this game engine a lot, all of his games are made using it, so he's gotten incredibly proficient at using it. However, there are a few downsides to Fusion. Although its design as a game engine is suited to small 2D experiences, once you make a game a little more beyond that scope, your project balloons in complexity almost exponentially, making for code that looks almost incomprehensible to anyone, including the developer. This leads to a lot of trade-off, hacks, and so many bugs. I'll get into the details of how code works in Fusion later in this video, but from my Oh, Jesus Christ, over 140 hours with Fusion already. I know that what Scott has been able to do with this thing is incredible. The fact his games aren't complete broken messes just shows how much time and passion Scott puts into his work, in my opinion. Also, I don't know if you heard me before, but this engine is very old. Although the build itself isn't too dated, the foundations Fusion is built upon is quite long in the tooth. And although it's not true that modern software is as old as its oldest line of code, Unreal Engine 5 has its roots dating back to 1997, and its games run about as well as if you played them on a machine from that age too. It's clear that Fusion has some limitations, such as a lack of controller support on PC, stable macOS ports, or Linux support, only runs in 32-bit. It also has some quirks. Yeah, let's call them quirks. There's also the troubling fact that Scott has seemingly abandoned his original games on PC. The last update to FNAF 1 was in late 2015, and it's laid dormant ever since. Sure, the game has been ported to mobile twice, and console, with ClickTeam Studio itself heading the ports, but although those versions of the game have new features, such as different languages, subtitles, the ability to turn off the warp perspective effect, and microtransactions, none of these additions have been brought over to Steam. So, between ClickTeam Fusion's age and Scott not updating the original games, all this leads me to come out and say it. What happens if, one day, the 2D FNAF games stop working? A big Windows update here, a driver change there, and some of the most influential horror games of all time could one day break, glitch, or stop working altogether. We've seen this happen to other highly influential games in the past, and lately the pushes from Microsoft and Nvidia haven't been the most conscious of legacy games. Both have been on a kill streak for older games in the last few months. The 2D FNAF games are 32-bit after all. Is it likely that their time may be up sooner rather than later? Nah, probably not. As I said, they're some of the most influential horror games of all time. If they got taken away by a stray Windows update, I think Scott would probably get out of his chair and fix it. Or sick ClickTeam on it, at least. And even if not, the FNAF technical community knows the games in their engine more intricately than even Scott at this point, so a fan patch would shortly follow, I'm sure. So, no, I don't actually believe the games are going anywhere, but what I can believe is those issues I listed before might get worse as time goes on. Okay, so FNAF 1 is playable in current year, but it has some quirks, problems, missing features, and things that would be cool to see fixed. Scott doesn't seem to be fussed about doing anything, so how can we as the community go about this? Well, one idea would be to mod the game. Plenty of old games that have been abandoned by their developers rely on the community to patch them to keep them playable on modern machines. The difficulty of this task varies from title to title, but every project to keep games of the past from fading into memory takes a lot of work. Most recently, we've seen a push to bring Unreal Tournament 2004 into the modern age by patching the original game into a playable state, all thanks to years of effort from a community of talented, passionate fans. The process of creating a community patch involves delving into the files of games, often literally staring at the ones and zeros that make up how the game works, and changing or rewriting the problematic parts to fix anything that was broken. This can take hundreds of hours, as it's rare you're working with readable, easily modifiable code. You need to decipher what's going on with the game itself before you can ever start to understand what's going wrong. If you want an example of the kind of work community patchers have to do in order to solve the issues of older games, I recommend some of the videos from Nathan Baggs. I'll link his channel below. Don't worry if you don't understand what's going on, I barely know what he's talking about half the time. This stuff is way too complicated for me. So, surely if the 2D FNAF games got too bad and the game started glitching, breaking, or failing to run, surely we could see a community effort to get them back into working condition. I think we would, definitely, if the time ever comes when the games reach that point. But thankfully, the games still run, though there are some issues that I would like to see addressed. Now, I could start a movement to preemptively make a community patch for the games, but honestly, I'm just one person, and I'm gonna be honest with you, there's something else I would like to do with the FNAF games that can't be done right now, and wouldn't be solved by a patch. And what that is better support for modding in general. Now, don't get me wrong, you can mod the 2D FNAF games. It's actually incredibly easy to do so. Because of the way Click Team Fusion works, all it takes is one piece of software you can download to convert the game you run back into its original source code. It's that unnervingly easy. However, there is one problem, and to explain it, I need to turn to a game that is incredibly easy to mod, everyone's favorite glitch generator, Skyrim. Skyrim, and every Creation Engine game, handles its content, every NPC, quest, item and level, in files called archives. These files are literally digital warehouses of content, and when the game needs something, it looks them up in a directory list, sort of like a map for where everything is in the warehouse, and retrieves them. Now, Bethesda knows their games aren't the most stable of games, so they created a system to allow them to patch their games quickly without the player needing to download gigabytes of data every time, or also to allow them to add expansions and DLC to your game easily. But more relevant to our case, however, it can also be used for modding. When you install a Skyrim expansion that you're never going to reach in your playthrough, or a mod that you're too ashamed to show anyone, it comes in one or two files known as a plugin file. These plugin files only contain the files that have been added or changed in that expansion or mod, so when the game boots, it first loads the base game files, then finds all the plugin files you have installed, and updates its directory list with everything contained in those plugin files. Now, when the game needs to load something that has been changed, it knows to go into the plugin files to retrieve it instead. You can have a ridiculous amount of mods in Skyrim because the engine only needs to know where each file is located and retrieves them like normal. I hope you like that explanation, because when it comes to the 2D FNAF games, you can take all of that and throw it into the bin, because each game contains one file, just the executable and nothing else. All of the sprites and sounds are crammed into this one file, which is the reason why Ultimate Custom Night, with its 50 animatronics, 2,115 sprites, and 308 sound effects, make up an executable that takes up a whopping 262 megabytes. Wow, really? That's small? That's actually not bad. So if we ever wanted to be able to mod our classic FNAF games like we can for Bethesda games, adding hundreds of new animatronics, new texture packs, etc., then without significant tooling and adjustments to how Fusion works, we are limited to only having one mod loaded at a time. It wouldn't be impossible, but it would take a lot of work that I simply don't want to do. All of these problems troubled Dogyon from 2 years ago, probably, I can't remember, and made me think to myself, wouldn't it be great if we had another way of playing the original FNAF games? One that can stand the test of time and be infinitely moddable, like what the Doom community has. But I assume I also thought, Doom is open source and freely available. The only reason they get to play Doom on literally everything is because the code is accessible in a language that is accessible and uses methods to be able to load mods easily, such as in Skyrim. So what you're saying is, I need to rewrite all the FNAF games from scratch in a more common coding language, committing myself to a project that would take me hundreds of hours? What? No, I didn't mean that at all. That would take ages of work, and all you'll have done is made a game that no one would care about because you've just literally remade FNAF 1. But it would make for an interesting YouTube video, right? One that would make a great way to kickstart a new channel, right? Maybe it will. Maybe it just will. And then I waited for 2 years. And then I started making it. Oh, and then as I was writing this script, another YouTuber made a video doing basically the same thing I'm doing, but with the second game. Differently enough that it's fine, but yeah, great minds think alike, I suppose. Okay, before I could start any work on this re-implementation, I'm just gonna call it a remake, I need to work out what language I was going to write it in. I wanted to avoid using an already established game engine like Unity or Godot, as although that would make my life easier, one of my goals was to make this game run with as minimal code as possible. I'm gonna release the codebase for anyone to use for free soon, so look forward to that. And I want users to be able to just download it, build it, and go. No faffing with other pieces of software if possible. One of the goals I have now for this game is to run natively on macOS and Linux, And in the future, I would love to see how possible it would be to slap this bad boy into other things too, so simplicity was key. I originally thought about writing the game in C, using Raylib as a library, but ultimately I decided against it for a slightly embarrassing reason. Before I started this project, I barely knew how to code.
What?
Don't get me wrong, I've shipped a lot of games in Unity and Unreal. I've been using Unreal's blueprints for the last 10 years and I knew a little bit of C#. But my area of expertise is designing games and making horrible spaghetti monsters. This project was my way of learning how to go from zero to a finished game, all hard-coded, and using an already existing design I thought would be a good way to get learning. Sure, I had used C before in parts, and I liked the idea of easily running this game on a toaster, but it may have been a bit too ambitious for me at the time, and the other goals I had for this project, ease of use and extensive modding capability, would have been very difficult to attain if I had used C. So ultimately, I settled on using C# with monogame libraries as a base. It might be a little more tricky to port it to older consoles, but honestly I would rather explode than to write my own memory management system. Even though all I had was just the text editor, no fancy tools like I'm used to, Monogame is actually straightforward to use. It's been around for ages, and I've heard great things about it since it was used for Stardew Valley, so I knew I was in good hands. However, I still had to write a lot of simple things from scratch. Take, for example, showing images on the screens and playing sounds, which leads me to a very important point. Now, an important thing I'd like to make clear, I'm not going to remake the sprites and sounds from FNAF. There are amazing projects out there that recreate the rooms and animatronics to an incredible detail, and I'd love to look into those at a later date, but for now, here's my plan for how players will play my version of FNAF 1. 1. Users have an official copy of FNAF 1 on Steam, as well as downloaded my version. 2. Users open my game and are asked to load in their official copy. 3. My game opens up their official games and pulls out all the images and sounds. And 4. My game uses those files and plays the game identically to the original. If you've ever played the Sonic Unleashed decomp or the Mario 64 decomp, that does a very similar thing. This is one of my measures to make sure my game is legal. Any assets that aren't made by me or I don't have a right to use come from your own official copy. And if Scott's watching, hi Scott, hope this is alright with you. Let me know if not. Please don't come for me.
There are a bunch of clowns watching your house, and they're coming in right now.
The actual system to load the Steam game and extract the files will have to come later, so for now I'm using a tool someone else kindly made called Nebular to dump out all the files into 2 folders, images and sounds. Images come to me as a huge list of PNGs, all numbered, which isn't very helpful. They're in some form of order. I think it's from the time Scott added them to the game, but they're still in a mess. So I wrote a file that organizes them into their sprite name, such as the desk fan. Then, when my code needs to load in the desk fan, it looks at this file, finds which images of which numbers it uses, and loads them in. This may look really simple, but it took me almost a week just to get to this point. Largely because I was getting the hang of C# and Monogame, honestly. Next thing on my list was the main menu. I reckoned if I could make the main menu look as indistinguishable to the original as possible, then that would motivate me to work on the rest. Also because, logic-wise, there isn't much going on. I could start by working out how ClickTeam Fusion does code, then figure out how I can convert that code into C#. A wise choice from me, as I quickly discovered how confusing it ended up being. Oh, I actually need to explain how ClickTeam Fusion works, don't I? Oh god, here we go. Okay, so each part of the game is broken into frames, which is kind of like the state the game is in, and each frame transitions from one to another. There's the main menu frame, the game frame, the custom night options frame, etc. This makes sense, as each frame doesn't really need to know too much about each other, just which screen to go to and where and when. I'll take this logic into my version too, but in mine they're called screens just because that's the word I'm used to. Inside each frame are objects. Objects come in a bunch of different kinds, but the most common one Scott used is a sprite. Everything in the game needs to be an object that is placed onto the frame, even if it's moved off screen and never seen. This is why you could zoom out on a game frame and there's a whole bunch of numbers scattered around out of view. Also that infamous box in FNAF World. Each number is tracking something, such as if the cams are open, if the player is looking at the left side of the room or the right, and a bunch of other parts that make up how the game functions. Each object can also contain extra information. It can store numbers, text, checks, but Scott almost always uses numbers, called alterable values. This is useful for programming logic, such as a character's health. Speaking of logic in Click Team Fusion looks like this. Yeah, if you thought written code was confusing, what the hell is this? Okay, it took me ages to decipher it, but here's what happens. All logic works on a when A, do B system, known in Fusion as a condition action. For example, when the player presses the new game button, send them to the frame that shows the newspaper. When every 8/100th of a second passes from the beginning of the frame, randomly choose what face Freddy pulls, and make the scan line a different opacity. On each frame, the game goes down this big list and checks if the condition is true, and if it is, it executes the action linked to it. Again, really easy for simple things, but FNAF 1 is anything but simple, and so there are 435 conditions for the game to check every frame for everything that happens in gameplay. You can filter by object, so you can only see the conditions and events that only involve that object, but Scott likes to hide logic within lots of different objects, so working out how something works takes a while of looking around. What makes things really hard, however, is that the process of turning a Fusion project into a game and then back is not a one-to-one process. Any information Fusion doesn't need when it compiles the game is discarded and lost, and one of these pieces of information is the name of these alterable values. At some point when programming the AI of the animatronics, Scott made alterable values containing all sorts of information and gave them each names. But when he built the game, Fusion discarded all those names, and so now I've decompiled the game back to its code, none of those values have their names anymore. They're all called alterable value A, alterable value B, and so on. The same thing goes for names of animations on a sprite object. They're just called animation 12, animation 13, 14, and on and on and on. This is an absolute pain, because now I'm 50 hours staring at Scott's code and it says shit like, when Bonnie alterable value G equals 0, add 1 to Bonnie alterable value B and change the animation sequence to 52. This is entirely illegible if you can't tell, and so I've had to write down my guess as to what each value meant and remember the number for each animation. Overall, I'm just not a fan of programs structured like this. It's all cool if you are, it's just not for me. For my remake of FNAF in C#, I'll be using objects, like in Fusion, but in C# they have the ability to do a lot more, as well as have the ability to inherit from bigger code bases. That's a gross simplification, but the bottom line is, I want to make sure the code is a lot more organized than what Fusion can allow. I'll also properly name my values too. Save me having a migraine. I am complaining about all this, but I will say, in the end, I did actually start to have fun looking at the original FNAF in Fusion, working out where a sprite should be placed, and writing that code and seeing it appear. A couple of hours in, I had remade the main menu, and I must say, it looks really accurate. Some of the text is a little off, but not to throw shade, the text in the original game isn't exactly evenly spaced either. So I gave myself the license to tweak things here and there. Anyway, one screen down, feeling confident, onto the main game itself. I'm making it sound so easy right now to hide the fact that it was hell. Okay, first things first was the background, with the desk fan, buttons, doors, and Freddy's boop snoot. This all needs to pan around the screen with that classic perspective effect, so I made a panning background object to hold all these elements, drew them onto the screen using a panning shader I learned from this shader from Shader Toy, and allowed the mouse to move it around. Off we go! It's really slow though, it took me a while to get the numbers right. You didn't think you'd get to see what's behind us in the office, did you? It's just the void. Okay, speed up and boundaries set. Next up was the CCTV panel. In the original game, the CCTV view is exactly the same object as the background, just that the ability to look is taken away from you and some monitor effects are put on the screen. This makes sense with how the original game works, but I figured I didn't have to fake it like that for my project. So the monitor is actually drawn on top of the background, mimicking real life a bit more. In my implementation, there's a location manager that knows about each room, what each one looks like, and importantly, which animatronics is in each room. The original game just runs a check every time you change the cameras. Having the ability to separate each logical piece of the game into its own object is super useful for making the code more readable for humans. And foxes. For example, the switch object can send off a message saying the door button is pressed, which a separate door object can listen in for, and when it receives it, it opens or closes. The power object keeps an eye on the door objects, the lights and the CCTV, and can update how much power is being used accordingly. It all makes sense, and is honestly a relief to work with compared to looking at Fusion's lists of if-ands. Speaking of buttons, remember when I said some things don't line up in the original game as you expect? Well, for a bit of trivia for you, did you know that in the original game, the button on the right is 10 pixels lower than the one on the left? It's really hard to spot because you can't see them both on screen, but when you notice it, you can't unsee it. Of course, I've kept this little detail in my game. It might be really important for the lore. But how the buttons in CCTV works in the original game is honestly a walk in the park compared to the mangle of code that makes up how the animatronics work. Mangle. Did you like that? That was good. Oh boy. Okay, so the enemies of my FNAF 1 remake needs to serve two purposes for reasons that will become clear soon. Maybe not in this video, but soon. Trust me. 1. Enemies need to function identically to the original game. Makes sense so far, we're making a replica here. 2. Enemies need to be hot swappable. What I mean by hot swappable is that I want to be able to delete enemies from the code and for the game to run perfectly fine. This is different from setting their AI to 0, that just means they exist but they can't move. No, I want to be able to literally Thanos snap Chica from existence and for my game to not crash. Sounds easy on paper, but it required a lot of reorganizing of code to make this work because part of this was ensuring that each enemy object was self-contained. No other object could need it to work or the other way around. Why do I need this? Well, one of my goals that I touched on before is extensive modability, and one of the most favorite types of mods players love are extra animatronics. Okay, picture this. The FNAF 1 gameplay experience, but now with the Paper Pals. Or Old Man Consequences. Okay, those suck, but you get what I mean. I want players to be able to load a near infinite amount of animatronics into the game and for it to be easy for modders to make their own. This is all way off in the future, mind you, but the foundations for this need to be laid out now. And honestly, I'm really happy with how the enemy code is structured. But before we could think about throwing a new contender in the ring, first, we need to make the original 4. I first made Chica, as she's the simplest in terms of AI in my opinion. Not that you'd know from looking at the original code. Ugh. I tried using some fan resources to help make sense of the logic, but honestly, some of that just confused matters further. No disrespect to any of the wikis or videos I used, but they're all designed for players of the game, not weirdos who think it's fun to make a game that already exists. Eventually I got the hang of how things are laid out, and Chica eventually started moving. I actually got my first ever jump scare from her while scripting how she moves. I had her AI at 20, and I thought she was just still wandering around near the bathrooms, but she had succeeded at moving to the doorway and into my office, so when I flipped the monitor down... yeah. That got me good. Anyway, onto Bonnie next, who is basically a mirrored Chica with a bit more teleporting. Then Freddy, who works completely differently, but wasn't too hard to replicate. Then Foxy, who was a little more annoying thanks to the use of timers to wait a certain number of seconds before taking an action. The final code for a lot of the enemy logic looks a lot more like its original counterparts than other elements where I played to C# strength, mainly because if I get a little bit of an enemy's AI wrong, players will know, and I want them to function identically as I can. I'm still not 100% sure if I have it right, but any differences can be worked out as time goes on. You may have noticed I'm calling it enemy code and not animatronic code. Why the difference? Well, The setup for implementing animatronics worked so well, I started using it for just about anything that can kill the player. Golden Freddy as an enemy? That makes sense. But the logic for power out, that is, the lights going out, Freddy appearing, music plays, and blackout, and then Freddy... you know, that's all contained in one enemy object too. In this game, Freddy exists in two separate objects, which makes sense as I needed Freddy's usual logic to deactivate as soon as the power goes out. It proved to be a really versatile system that, although it could do with some improvements here and there, was the bow that wrapped the whole remake together. So, finally the game works. Finishing touches now, story progression going from day to day, 6th night, then custom night, adding phone guy. Then the opening and ending screens. Finally, a system for saving a player's progress, and it's all finally done. A re-implementation of Five Nights at Freddy's 1 as accurate as possible. There are still some things that need a bit more work. The custom night screen isn't completely right, and Freddy doesn't creepily flash when you're out of power. Hopefully I can phrase that sentence a lot better before I upload this video. But overall, the gameplay is so accurate, comparing it side by side is wild to see just how close I am already. Now, to give this project a name. Throughout all of this project, I was calling the game FNAF 1 Remake, which isn't an accurate title and I wanted a better one. While I was coding, I was thinking that a lot of what I was writing could also be applied to the other titles in the 2D FNAF lineup, if I was ever dumb enough to tackle those too. So I wanted a name that fit. And so, without further ado, I want you to welcome to the stage Open Freddy, a 2D Five Nights at Freddy's game engine. This bad boy is designed to only run 2D FNAF games, excluding FNAF World, that would be insane, and right now can only play Five Nights at Freddy's 1. It can run on Windows, macOS, and Linux, and also comes with a really cool launcher that can be used to manage all the game files like I mentioned before, but for now is a window with only one button. There's still a ton of things that don't work well, and it's not in a state to share to the world right now, such as the aforementioned one-button launcher, but I'm hoping to have it ready for the public in the next few months. But if you're really desperate to try out Open Freddy and play it for yourself, I'll have a link to the build as well as installation instructions up on my Discord. I cannot guarantee it will work or won't be full of bugs though, and in case Sky is still watching, hi again, it's just my own code that I'm sharing, and you'll always need your own bought copy of FNAF 1 on Steam in order to play it. Again, please don't come after me, Scott. Love ya. Okay, so I've made a game that runs exactly like another game, apart from the parts where it doesn't yet. So, what now? Now that I have a foundation for a more clean, more portable codebase for FNAF, I can use this to more easily expand upon it to make the game more of the enhanced experience I was imagining 3 years ago. Because everything is more or less organized well and C# allows me to expand and add new systems, it means I can add features with more ease than if I were to mod the original game using ClickTeam Fusion. For example, while I was writing the code for the warped perspective effect, I found that Monogame has the function to smooth out edges in shader code. So I added the ability to change settings via this INI file, and now those jagged edges in the background can be smoothened out. I thought that would take me a lot more time, but it was just one little line. Sweet! Also, once I finished this leg of the project and was putting together this video, something that took me longer than I thought, I can't think of any part of this video that would have taken a really long time to put together. I tinkered with some of the features on my bucket list of things I want to do, and I managed to tackle 2 of them already. One was the option to reduce flashing lights, both for people who need it in order to play games, but also for reducing the bitrate demolishing static in the main menu or when you die. I also managed to get subtitles into the game. Subtitles aren't new in FNAF 1, you'll know them if you've played the new mobile or console ports, but they are noticeably absent in the Steam release. Well, they're not from mine, as I transcribed all of Phone Guy's messages, imported them into the game, and wrote a script to display them synced to the audio. And I have to say, they work amazing. It only took me a day to implement too, such is how easy it is to work with my engine. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but I'm really proud of how Open Freddy has come out already, and this is only the beginning. In the next video, I want to expand the engine's capabilities further, and do things with FNAF 1 that you would never be able to do with the original game, as well as release the project to the world, open source and completely free. That's all I've got for now, but the sky is the limit. Let me know in the comments what things you would love to see me do with FNAF 1. Want me to implement Twitch chat controls, Wiimote functionality? Want me to put Bear 5 in there? Sure, f it. Tell me in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching my first ever video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you want to play what I've made so far, head on over to my official Discord linked below and stay up to date on any updates it has. If you want to see more of me, I'll be live streaming both here and on my Twitch, both making games and playing them badly, so feel free to hop in and say hi. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.